There you go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 61st webinar on the Secret Doctrine. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation Webinars and Webinar Series in Progress, as shown here. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar series you'd like to view. You can register for any of these webinars on the homepage of the Moria Federation up here in the upper left-hand corner. They are always listed. The next one up in each series is listed. Alrighty. This month in Old Diary Leaves. With HPB's health much improved, remember she had a crisis last time, almost died, and with the assurance from the masters that they will sustain her health until her work is done, because remember at this point, we're at 1884, the Secret Doctrine had not been written. In fact, it wouldn't be written for another 4 years. And so they had to step in and work to sustain HPB's health. So free from these duties of health care worker, Colonel Olcott is free to visit a famous mesmerist. So we'll be reading about 19th century mesmerism this time. Could we get a reader, please?
On the Wednesday, we dined at Mr. Duncan's, where we witnessed and assisted in some very instructive mesmeric experiments. I recollect one which recalls some narratives in Baron Dupotet's classical work. Oh, wow.
La magie dévoilée.
Thank you. In the center of the drawing room stood a large round table, and the company sat against the walls all around the room. The subject, a Hindu servant, being in another room where he could hear nothing of our conversation. I asked Mr. Duncan to draw on the floor with his finger an imaginary line from the table outward, and will that the subject should not be able to cross it. The company present chose the place where the line should be drawn, and then Mr. Duncan, approaching his fingertips to the carpet, but without touching it, willed that his subject should not be able to pass the invisible barrier. The subject was then sent for. On entering, he was told to walk around the table twice, after which he would be told what to do next.
Okay, next reader. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Martha, can you read that, please?
Yes. He began the circumambulation and went on well enough until he came to the enchanted spot, when he suddenly stopped, tried to lift one foot to step forward, failed, shrank back, and said he couldn't go farther. Why? Why don't you see that line of fire? How could I get past it? He answered. I told him there was nothing there, to try again. It was quite useless. He could not advance an inch until Mr. Duncan, who had all this while standing silent, made a dispersive sweep with his hand and said, all right.
Thank you, Martha. Next up.
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Having a day at command before sailing, I profited by a visit from Mr. Duncan to our house to make further and better mesmeric experiments on his boy, Tommy. The boy was made to sit with his back against the wall of the room, just beside a large French window opening on a sunny veranda. His mesmerizer, Mr. Duncan, stood facing him with a white handkerchief in his hands. I stood in the veranda, out of Tommy's range of vision with a book of samples of bright colored papers used by bookbinders and others. Mr. Duncan would say to Tommy, showing the handkerchief, "What is this?" "A handkerchief. Color, white." I would then show Duncan, say, a red paper, and he, still holding the handkerchief out to Tommy, would repeat, "Color?" "Red," the boy would answer. So color after color would be silently shown to the mesmerizer. In the next moment, he mentally imparted it to the linen handkerchief, and then it was seen by the hypnotized, and it was seen by the hypnotized subject. This was, I fancy, about as fine a proof of the possibility of thought transference as can be found on record.
Thank you. And next up.
Vivian, can you read that, please?
While in Paris in the October preceding, Mr. Rudolph Gebhard and I had been present on the 18th at some mesmeric experiments of M. Robert, the well-known masseur magnétiseur, on one of his clairvoyant subjects. Among other things, the latter told us that he saw us sailing in a steamer on a far-off sea, a man falling overboard. The steamer stopped, a boat put out, and the steamer sailing in a circle. That sounded queer, as neither of us recollected the evident fact that a vessel, especially a steamer, usually does sail in a circle to pick up a person who has gone overboard. However, I made a note of it at the time, and it now came vividly back to me, for while crossing the Bay of Bengal on March the 14th, a Hindu deck passenger fell overboard, and the Himalaya sailed in a circle to pick him up. The coming event of March had, therefore, cast its astral shadow before it on the clairvoyant brain, 5 months in advance of its happening.
Thank you, Vivian. Well, this should have read, does not sail in a circle. Usually a steamer does not sail in a circle, but this time they did, and it was clairvoyantly seen. Thank you all. Okay. So last month, we ended with an animated discussion on Leah centers and on the Leah condition in general, followed by info on the divine plenum and the fullness of space, the invisible source of all manifestation, which brings us up to where we left off, a passage describing the opposing views of science and occult cosmogony on the duration of the universe, with scientists believing that since the universe is a purely physical entity, it will eventually die. Occultists, on the other hand, believe in unseen causal levels that renew the life's force. It really comes down to a belief, or lack of, in unseen causality and the law of periodicity. So let's continue on the next page with, could we get a reader for this part, please, including the footnote?
Greg, can you read that, please? Greg?
You there, Greg?
I'm here.
Great.
I'm here. Sorry.
No problem.
They had eternity to run down in. Why then is not the cosmos a huge inert mass? Even the moon is only hypothetically believed to be a dead planet. Rundown? And astronomy does not seem to be acquainted with many such dead planets.
And go ahead and read the footnote. Yeah.
Yeah. The moon is dead only so far as regards her inner principles, i.e., psychically and spiritually. However absurd the statement may seem, physically, she is only as a semi-paralyzed body may be. She is aptly referred to in occultism as the insane mother, the great sidereal lunatic.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So first up, they had eternity to run down in. Why then is not the cosmos a huge inert mass? Even the moon is only hypothetically believed to be a dead planet. Run down, and astronomy does not seem to be acquainted with many such dead planets. Of course, modern astronomers have a comprehensively greater understanding of the age of our physical universe. They put it at 13.77 billion years than 19th century astronomers had. But this doesn't change the modern occultist's understanding of renewal through the law of periodicity. I find it amusing that science bases its entire theory of existence on an essentially occult phenomena, that is, the sudden appearance of all matter on the material plane all at once. So when we compare science's 13.77 billion year period with the 311 trillion, 80 billion year period said to be the length of 100 years of Brahma, we get some idea of the difference between the two perspectives. The scientific calculation representing the lengths of elapsed time for this single universal cycle, the occultist perspective representing the total length of a universal manifestation made up of many lesser cyclic manvantaras and pralayas. As to the footnote on lunar life or lack thereof, let's take a look at DK for a concise teaching on the moon. Can we get a reader, please?
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
Another point which should be noted is that the influence of the moon is purely symbolic in nature and effect, and is simply the result of ancient thought and teaching descended to us from Lemurian times, and is not based upon any true radiation or influence. In those far-off times, antedating even Lemuria and constituting in Lemurian days simply an ancient tradition, the moon appeared to be a living, vital entity. But I would have you bear definitely in mind that today the moon is nothing more than a dead form. It has no emanation and no radiation of any kind, and therefore has no effect of any kind. The moon, from the angle of the esoteric knower, is simply an obstruction in space, an undesirable form which must someday disappear. In esoteric astrology, the effect of the moon is noted as a thought effect and as the result of a powerful and most ancient thought form. Nevertheless, the moon has no quality of her own and can transmit nothing to the earth. Let me reiterate, the moon is a dead form. It has no emanation at all.
He really goes out of his way to underscore this idea, right? Which is somewhat at odds with HPB's concept on this. Could we get another reader for this, please?
Prudy, can you read that for us, please?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Just barely.
What causes the apparent deadness of the moon is the Deva life upon it. Does solar prana have no effect there? What constitutes the difference between the apparently dead moon and a live planet such as the Earth? Here we touch upon a hidden mystery, of which the solution lies revealed for those who seek, in the fact that human beings and certain groups of devas are no longer found upon the moon. Man has not ceased to exist upon the moon because it is dead and cannot therefore support his life, but the moon is dead because man and these deva groups have been removed from off its surface and from its sphere of influence. Man and the devas act on every planet as intermediaries or the transmitted agencies. Where they are not found, then certain great activities become impossible and disintegration sets in.
Thank you. Thank you, Trudy. You're very faint. You may try to adjust the volume on your output in your computer. We could hear you, but just so.
perhaps I need to use
Any
another
thoughts?
headset.
I'm sorry.
Perhaps I've got another headset. Maybe try and use the other headsets.
That might work better. So any thoughts or questions about this? He's really clear. And this is a fascinating idea that the moon didn't die and then humanity had to leave. It was just the reverse, that it died because humanity and certain Deva groups left, right? And then so you can see the cause effect here is real important. The source of life is the life that lives on the globe. And when that source transfers, then the globe dies. And we're going to be getting into that in the next section. In fact, it's going to be during this webinar. Okay, so let's finish the passage. Can we get a reader, please?
And Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
The query, why is the cosmos not a huge inert mass, is unanswerable. But apart from this, it must be noted that the idea of the amount of transformable energy is our little system coming to an end is based purely on the fallacious concept of a white-hot incandescent sun, perpetually radiating away his heat without compensation into space. To this we reply that nature runs down and disappears from the objective plane, only to re-emerge after a time of rest out of the subjective and to re-ascend once more. A cosmos and nature will run down only to reappear on a more perfect plane after every pralaya.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you.
Okay, so first up, the idea of the amount of transformable energy in our little system coming to an end is based purely on the fallacious conception of a white-hot incandescent sun, perpetually radiating away his heat and substance without compensation into space. So science has to hold this point of view because their discipline does not allow them to embrace the law of periodicity or the fact of unseen causality. DK gives us the occult teaching on the sun. Can we get a reader, please?
Okay, hold on just a minute. Tia's got her hand up.
Yeah,
So Tia, if you'll ask your question and then if you'll read when you're done, okay?
Of course. Francis, if you could just go back 2 frames, when you're talking about the moon and the whole concept of intermediaries, I find that fascinating when you're talking about the movement of these energies, so that if man and Devas were acting as the intermediaries, the removal of them alone as transmitting force caused the moon to die. I mean, that's just amazing to me.
Yeah, it's one of the fundamentals of occultism, this idea of the transfer of the energy of the kingdoms off of one globe onto the next. And that's going to be the subject of this interlude between verse 4 and verse 5, which is like this 39-page interlude where she deeply explores this concept. So we're going to be getting into it in just a short while, exactly a lot more about this idea. It's the moon, in our case, was the Earth globe of the previous chain. So the moon, on the moon chain, the moon was equivalent to the Earth, and that the energy was transferred across to this. And then when that happens, then you have a dead, slowly disintegrating corpse of a previous globe. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, you bet.
Hold on just 1 minute before you start reading, Tia.
Okay.
Francis,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm probably saying your name wrong. Lida Maria, she says, I'm confused about the moon being dead. So ACT is, what is the importance of the full moon meditation?
Yeah, well,
He
that's
says, I'm pretty new on this subject, and I do want to be, and I don't want to be disrespectful. So,
yeah, well, don't worry about that. We're all pretty casual around here, and all your questions are, we're happy to make questions about anything at all. Okay. This is, however, not what there's no pat answer for this. Why is it that the full moon is such a powerful time if the moon is dead? What is that about, right? Well, there's a couple of answers that I can forward. First of all, you could say that the sun obscures the dead aspect of the moon, and it's as though for a moment during that time that the moon is as though it weren't in space, that it, you could say, negates the moon in that. That's one theory concerning that, the importance of that. The other is that the hierarchy projects thought forms. For instance, the influence of the constellations, we learned this recently in esoteric astrology, that the influence of the constellations is largely due to a concerted projected thought form by the hierarchy on humankind of those constellations, which acts as a linking force between the constellations themselves and humanity. The same thing could be happening with the moon, that there's been this powerful thought form set up so that humanity will come together and meditate during that time. By the way, DK also says that the hierarchy itself meditates both at the full and the new moon equally. It was this teaching that led Michael Robbins to set up this series of new moon meditations. So hope that helps a little bit.
Francis?
Yeah.
I would just like to add that it's an alignment. It's both the new moon and the full moon. It's an alignment like we do ourselves in meditation between the sun, the earth, and the moon. And when we do the full moon meditations, we're not concentrating on the sign of the moon. We're concentrating on the sign of the sun. You know, it's the solar fire meditation at the time of this alignment. And of course, with the new moon, the sun and the moon are together. So again, it's the solar fire aspect that we're concentrating on. But, you know, as you pointed out, that's why DK says that, you know, he says that the hierarchy meditates at the time of both the full moon and the new moon, and that it allows a closer approach to Shambhala.
Yeah, especially the new moon is very specifically related to that shambhalic energy. So yeah, you literally have an alignment in space. You know, just like we're always looking for in our astrological charts for, you know, trines, conjunctions, oppositions. We have a literal physical alignment with every new and full moon. The three are literally aligned at that point, and this creates an energy as a result. Yeah, thanks for adding that, Beal. It's actually, I think, probably the most important point of that, as well as the fact that the hierarchy has created a potent thought form for that time that we also align with. Okay, let's see. Tia, have you read this? Oh, we have more.
Yeah, she hasn't read it yet, but we have two more hands up.
That's
so go ahead, please, Mary.
Yeah, well, thank you all, because astrologers have to deal with this question all the time. So it's a very pertinent question. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Maybe you already said it, but I like how Michael used to put this. He used to say, we need to solarize our planet. We need to solarize our personalities.
Yes.
And he used to say that with the rituals of the full moon, like Francis said, there is no obstruction between the soul ray, the sun rays, and the earth, because the moon is not in between. So symbolically, we are in sync with that intention, with the hierarchy, to solarize our systems, right?
That is really well said. Yeah, exactly. You could say that the moon is behind the Earth and completely is not blocking in any way the solar influence. Yeah, at the full moon. That's why we see it fully lit. And anyone else?
Fred, you want to go ahead, Fred?
Yeah, I was going to say essentially the same thing. I'd always been taught that we're really dealing with a full sun because we're getting greater solar energy at the time of the full moon. And
Yeah,
the ability to handle that depends on their soul evolution, which is why people behave differently at the full moon. Spiritually inclined people are tending to be in meditation, hopefully in full form. And the average person their emotions are pushed out of control because they don't know what's happening, and they're just feeling greater energy than they normally would. So that's always been my understanding.
yes. Yeah, good stuff. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
Yes. Greg's got his hand up. Go ahead, Greg.
Astronomically speaking, the moon itself, as we are learning more and more, is purely just reflective light. So that means it's a projection of solar light that lightens the moon, that we can see it at all. I mean, all of that, whenever you look at the moon, you're just looking at reflective light.
That's right.
Which means it's nothing more than that. So it's we associate that with some kind of radiatory quality, but when you look at all the other planets in our solar system, that light is imminent for those planets. So I kind of envision them seeing that they carry enough light in their own radiative process, which gives them life in the sense that we can understand it.
Well, actually, all the planets are reflective. It's including the moon, but it's specific for us because it's so close to us. It really, another point can be added to this discussion, which is that it's a fantastic metaphor for the soul-infused personality. The moon represents, it doesn't actually have any energy of its own. DK makes that real clear. How many times did he say it? Like 5? That has no emanation, no energy of its own, but it is a metaphor for the dense physical, and to have it fully illumined with the radiant light of the sun is a symbol or metaphor for the soul-infused personality. So we can add that to the list. And I saw Ann Parker's hand go up.
Yes. Ann, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, not to drag it out, but I just have a quick question because now I feel like I don't have the answer to this, though I feel like I may have before this discussion. But how, Francis, or even BL, would you then, let's say daily, the moon is in different signs or every 2 days, and there are people and Instagrammers and everyone that have like, today the moon's in Cancer, we should be doing X, Y, and Z. How is that approached if we think the moon is dead, etc.? How that must have some significance, I would think.
Do you want to take it, BL?
Sure. Astrologically, the moon it transits all along. And I always say the transits are the most important when they interact with another planet in your chart. remember that DK tells us that the moon is dead and it has no emanation of its own, but it's a big repository of those past patterns, of those past thoughts, of those past feelings that become the prison of our soul. Okay. But if it's not pinging directly on something in our chart, then it doesn't really matter that it's in Cancer at this point, or we work with the full moon and we work with the new moon because DK tells us those are important times for meditation for the hierarchy. And then we look to the way it pings. And of course, the transit to anything in our chart would be, what are we holding back in that regard? What is it that we need to let go in that regard? So I hope that helps.
And I'll add to that the moon also veils the energy of other planets. And so its appearance can represent that veiling. The appearance in your chart can represent that veiling. For instance, if you're a Virgo or have aspects to Virgo that are important, the moon in Virgo veils Vulcan, which brings this great, tremendous first-rate energy into the purification of the form. So, in fact, there's no instance in when the moon is a ruling planet in the signs that it's not veiling something. It's never just the moon. It's always veiling usually either, or maybe always, Vulcan, Neptune, or Uranus. And that is going to be our big conversation point, it looks like, because we have more hands, right?
Yes. Tia, go ahead.
I think you and Francis have already touched on this, but I guess just to bring it back, the notion of the moon and its effect really, if you're dealing with an exoteric astrologer or esoteric astrologer, would be a huge distinction as far as where its transits would be. And also where a person would be on the path and the level of soul infusion that, just quite clearly, its importance would be. I guess that was my only point.
Indeed, that's totally right. Yeah. And just as it is with your rising sign, and actually, your entire chart has to be interpreted completely differently based on whether you're on the path or still working at a personality level. Okay, was there another hand?
Yeah, multiple. Go ahead, please, Mary.
Yeah, I love this discussion because when I try to teach people esoteric astrology, I lose students when I start talking about the moon. And because especially traditional astrologers, they really get mad because exactly like you said, the person who asked, everybody follows the moons and the moon in each signs and all these posts from astrologers, and I want to be respectful. So I would have probably comments, but also questions for the more experienced in the group. What I tell people is try to notice for yourself and see, because also Decay says that these are all thought forms, and thought forms, they are powerful. And we've been doing rituals since ancient times, so these energies, they're already impregnated, and if we need to solarize and transform them, give new meaning, probably teaching people that probably what they're doing is they're channeling the energies of Vulcan and Neptune or Uranus through their moon. That could be one of the hypotheses. Or also, sometimes Michael would say in his workshops, not everybody is free from their astral bodies and the dominance of the emotional astral system. And maybe there, this lunar self has its power. So I don't know. I would ask you for your inputs on this too.
Well, you always come up against this hardcore phrasing here. Let me pull it up. You know, this hardcore stuff, you know, where he tells you, you know, where is it here? The moon is a dead form. It has no emanation at all, right? And that it is about the result of ancient thought and teaching. These are thought forms that have been set up in ancient times and still hold, which, you know, you could say then that the actual moon has no emanation, but the thought forms associated with the moon still have an effect, right? And that answers some questions about its potency in astrology. And yeah, everybody's going to say something about this, I see. So
Yeah, we have multiple hands. So, Fred, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to hope I can put this in language that's understandable. When it comes to these things in astrology, I always refer back to Isabel Hickey and the idea that astrology is a cosmic science, and as such, it is a science of relationships. And that is the way we need to think about anything in an astrological chart, especially how it pertains to our own soul growth and our own personality. So whereas the mundane, the ordinary astrologer would look and say, oh, Uranus is in Taurus in the 9th house, and that means, and you could take that right out of a book, and that's what it means. The only thing is, in real life, it exists only blended into all the other things in the chart at that specific moment. In other words, what is a carrot? Well, if you bite it by itself, it's a carrot. But if you cook it and put it in soup, where's the carrot? It's all blended into other things. And so to me, this is the same conversation that the scientists are having about the age of the universe and what the occultists say. Because the scientists are always going to be analytical and reduce everything to its smallest piece. And the occultist is always going to put everything into its broadest context. And so that two utterly opposing ways of looking at the world. And they each have their purposes. But here we are basically esotericists and always work from the general to the particular, so they say. So I'll leave it at that. And hopefully it was useful to some people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Next up, who?
Okay. Actually, Tom was next. Tom, you want to go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We have talked about this in other contexts, but I would like to specify a question. So it is said in esoteric astrology that the moon is the prison of the soul. So do you see that this is based on the thought form quality? Let's say I have a moon in Capricorn, and when I feel negative energies, that is not then anything from the moon, it's just some kind of distortion from the Capricornian energy through the thought form. Is it that the way you see it, or some other way?
You know, we go back to DK on this, which was not a belief shared by HPB. It's one of the places where they diverge in their beliefs. You know, the moon has no emanation at all. So if we take that, you know, and he says it here, no emanation, no radiation of any kind, I mean, has no effect of any kind. You know, he rarely is this forceful and adamant with a single fact. He was probably, he probably saw this webinar in his vision and realized that he needed to say this 9 times, you know. So, you know, I don't know what to tell you because I think that we're left with the planets of Veils and the fact that it's an ancient thought form that is very potent. But, more than that, I can't really answer your question about, if you're feeling the moon, what is actually going on there.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably the thought form or the veiling experience, one of the two.
That's my theory also, that because the sign where the moon is located is that negativity, so it comes through the sign, and if it doesn't come from the moon, as the DK says it 1,000 times, so it must come somehow from the thought form that is reflecting this sign.
That seems to be what he's suggesting. BL, do you have a thought on that? When the moon appears in a specific sign, is it then a combined thought form with that sign, or what do you do with that?
Yes, it's all related. And what DK actually tells us in esoteric astrology, this is on page 18 and 19. He says, in connection with the sun sign, the rising sign, and the effect of the thought form relating to the moon, the position of esoteric astrology is as follows. The sun sign indicates the present problem of the man. The ascendant or rising sign indicates the intended life or immediate soul purpose for this incarnation. And the moon, this type of force coming from certain planets and not from the moon, indicates that which is past. It therefore summarizes limitation and the present handicaps. It governs the physical body and shows where the prison of the soul is to be found. Okay, now also keep in mind that the moon, the earth, and the sun are non-sacred planets. So there's a lot, I liked what Fred said, no planet stands alone. It's everything together. But sure, the sign of the moon is important, and the rulers of the moon and how that impacts the prison of the soul. But anyway, that's what DK says on it in esoteric astrology, the beginning of esoteric astrology.
Right. So he makes 2 points that we've been talking about, right? Which is that the thought form, he says, the sun position, the rising position, and the thought form of the moon, right? And then later he says that the planets that it veils then represents the prison house of the soul. So it's the conditioning of the moon, or that mysterious event, which is veiling, and the energy transformation that results from that, is also part of that present house of the soul aspect.
Okay, now we have a coherent theory. Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting there, at least. I don't know if it's completely, absolutely solid, but I think we have better understanding than we did going in.
Yeah,
this is what's great about this group work. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yes, Karen, go ahead.
Well, since everyone's asking questions, I have one too. You said that at the full and new moons, the hierarchy projects thought forms of the constellation. So does that?
I didn't say that.
You didn't?
No. I said that at the beginning, really in Lemurian times, these thought forms were set up. That the hierarchy projected these thought forms in order to align the energy of the constellations through the hierarchical thought form building to humanity. Not that they do this at the time of the full and new moon.
So
and remember, we're looking at the solar fire energies. We are not looking at the energies of the sign the moon is in. We're looking at the energies, even at the full moon, of the sign the sun is in. I just want to emphasize that point.
That's, yeah, exactly. That's why, Michael always, he would call it, for instance, we're coming onto the Sagittarius full moon. Well, most astrologers would say that's wrong. It's whatever sign the moon is in during the month that Sagittarius rules. But that was of secondary importance and influence from a solar perspective.
So you're saying that projected thought forms of the constellation happened a long time ago, and it's not something that happens at each full moon?
Yeah, I've never read that this is renewed, that this thing about this establishing of the thought forms of the energy of the constellation is renewed in any connection with the moon. It's just something.
No, with the moon, well, the full moon, not necessarily the moon, but that energy that's coming forth, the energy from the sun.
Well, we're talking about two different things. At some point, the hierarchy built this bridge from the constellational energy to the planet via the thought forms that they built connected with those constellations. What they're really doing is facilitating the energy of those constellations so they can be received by humanity. That's independent of anything to do with the moon.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about the quality of light that's radiated by, at each full moon, which we've been told can be used as a seed thought, to tap into the essence of that energy, is that related to that constellational energy, so to speak?
Well, not in anything that I've read that that's specifically related to that. I also said that when we started this conversation day before yesterday, that that it's very possible that the hierarchy also projected a thought form about the solar energy related to the full moon. They also projected that as a bridge for humanity, but that's just my own interpretation based on the written fact that the hierarchy created these thought forms in relation to the constellations. I was just developing that to say that also could have happened with the full moon and new moon, that they also have, certainly these thought forms exist of the importance of the exact moment of the full moon and of the new moon, right? So it just follows that the hierarchy would have built these thought forms and made that energy more available to humanity through those thought forms, right? But it's not really directly related to that thought form building with the constellation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that Greg added something in here in the in the comment section to everyone that, for example, the coming full moon in Sagittarius, well, that's the solar fire Sagittarius. The actual physical position of the moon will be reflective of the Gemini energy. So,
which is always true.
What we're celebrating is the Sagittarian aspect, the solar aspect of that.
Right. But there is something to, the axes, they're always at the opposite position at the full moon, right?
Absolutely.
And so as a result of that, there is an energizing of that axis, something I never thought about actually, in relation to the full moon. DK says that there's really only 6 energies and that each axial energy expresses itself in 2 ways, and there's even themes to these axes. And this is a really interesting pursuit if you want to take a look at that, like the impulse of Aries and the balance of Libra, right? Or that energy of the individual, of coming into individual awareness, the I am awareness in Leo, and then into group awareness in Aquarius. There's a thematic quality to these axes. It's really interesting to explore. And you have that axis present at every full and new moon, because at the new moon, they're conjunct, and at the full moon, they're opposites, right?
I also want to put a plug in here. Yvonne says, we need an ongoing webinar on astrology. Well, we have a number of them out there, and who knows, we might start another one. But I do, as you said, Francis, I do have that webinar series that Eva and I did on the pairs of opposites. And we discussed the solar fire full moon in there, but we really laid emphasis on those axes of the opposites there. So
you have a
okay.
go-to, people.
Yeah, it's there on Makara. I'll hunt down the link and give it to you in a minute, but Fred has his hand up, so go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to put out another frame of reference, which is the statement, the paradoxical nature of truth. And for me, that's the best way to frame all this stuff. It's all like a Zen koan. You ask the larger question. So we all say the sun rises and you drop something and it falls down, or we weigh 200 pounds, but all those statements are not true, and we know that. So when people other than ourselves talk about the moon and its effect and this, that, and the other, and Blavatsky says one thing and DK says another, to me, they're really attempting to use language to describe what is, and they're just describing it differently. I mean, all civilizations have basically done meditations at the full moon and the new moon with different understandings of what the moon itself is actually doing in terms of causation. What matters from a humanity point of view, as I understand it, is the connection that each human being makes with their own soul, and through that to spirit, or whatever you want to call the cosmos. You know, nowadays they call it source, or what, you know, whatever. And so it doesn't, I don't see Blavatsky saying one thing and DK saying something else as, you know, they're both useful ways of approaching what we think. So for me, it is anyway. So I'll leave it at that for whatever that stimulates in other people's minds.
Okay, thank you, Fred. So are we through with questions and comments on the moon?
I think we are. So it's time for Tia to read the.
There we go.
There you go. There you go.
The solar logos connects the creator of the solar system with his great thought form by a stream of energy from the central spiritual sun to a point in the center of the physical sun. The objective solar system, or the sun in manifestation, is the result of the blending of spirit, electric fire, with matter, fire by friction, and the emanations of the sun in time and space are dependent upon the adequacy of the matter and of the form to the life within.
Okay, so this was, I included this, these quotes in reference to the scientific idea that the sun is a white-hot incandescent entity that perpetually radiates away its heat and substance into space, and therefore eventually all must die, right? This is the counter to that scientific premise. Okay, next up. To this, we reply that nature runs down and disappears from the objective plane, only to re-emerge after a time of rest out of the subjective and to reascend once more. Our cosmos and nature will run down only to reappear on a more perfect plane after every pralaya. I see Tia's hand.
Okay, go ahead, Tia.
I'm sorry, Francis, but on the previous slide, So what you're talking about, is this the birth, how the fires bring forth consciousness? Is this what this second paragraph is about?
No, it's about the how the objective solar system comes into being. It's the result of the blending of these two fires. And yes, that is also at our level is what brings forth consciousness. In other words, yeah. So, and the emanations of the sun in this case is describing our solar logos, who is a second ray solar system, right? In time and space, are dependent on, let's put it this way, this solar aspect, which is the sunship, its capacity is dependent on the adequacy of the matter at hand, on one hand, and of the form to the life within. So, in other words, that the potency and quality of the emanation of the sun is dependent on the ability of the life aspect to utilize the form available, the adequacy of the form available. That's what that means. Does that make sense? Like in the previous solar system, when matter was in the process of development, there was no opportunity at all for electric fire spirit to manifest through the form aspect because the time wasn't ready. The form aspect, the fire by friction, had not developed to the point that it could hold, as it does now, that sunship. Okay, does that make sense?
Thank you, Francis. That was helpful. I'm a little bit slow, so.
No, you're not. I know you well enough to know that's not true. Okay, so we were here, and let's see. Okay, so sorry, I'm kind of catching up. So yeah, he says here, you know, she states the scientific point of view, and here she states the subjective or occultist point of view about the cyclic nature. And I'd like to take a closer look at the law of periodicity, which makes this whole idea a little clearer. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes. Anne Parker, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Cyclic evolution is entirely the result of the activity of matter and of the will or spirit. It is produced by the interaction of active matter and molding spirit. Every form holds hid a life. Every life constantly reaches out after the similar life latent in other forms. When spirit and matter sound the same note, evolution will cease. When the note sounded by the form is stronger than that of spirit, we have attraction between forms. When the note sounded by spirit is stronger than that of matter and form, we have spirit repelling form. Here we have the basis for the battlefield of life and its myriads of intermediate stages.
Thank you, Anne. I hope this makes that a little clearer, this interaction. And it's in this solar system that this interaction became possible. It's a solar system for the second principle to come to the fore. All right. Next up, the matter of the Eastern philosophers is not the matter and nature of the Western metaphysicians, for what is matter? So to answer HPB's question, we're going to turn to the Theosophical Glossary. And could we get a reader, please?
Fred, can you read that for us, please?
If you'll give me a moment to put my glasses on, I can.
Okay, go
Maybe
ahead.
it's else to read now, and I'll read next. Okay, is that okay with you?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, okay. Andrea, can you read that, please?
I can. Matter is, in the widest sense, the negative pole of the one universal life regarded as a duality. The manifested one, considered as a unit, is called the manifested logos. And as a duad, it becomes spirit, matter, or life. Matter is thus co-eternal with spirit, forming the vehicular or passive aspect of every plane. It is equivalent to prakriti or sakti, maya, or pradhana. And just as there are 7, 10, or 12 prakritis, so there are 7, 10, or 12 matters. The root essence of all the series is what the Hindus called mula prakriti, root nature. Equivalently, matter may also be defined as the illusory aggregate of veils surrounding the fundamental essence of the universe. Matter, in the scientific sense, is a precept resulting from the interaction of our physical senses with the physical plane of Prakriti. Formerly regarded as having an existence independently of the observer, its illusory nature is now better recognized. In attempting to conceive of matter in a general sense, the mind must be relieved of familiar notions of physicality, extended space, of resistance, mass, bulk, etc., properties peculiar to the physical plane of consciousness, but which we are apt to transfer unwittingly to our notions of other kinds of matter. We may speak of mind stuff as the scene of mental activity and the vehicle of thought force, but we can hardly view this as a kind of rare gas. Grossness, inertness, and immobility are attributes of the physical plane rather than of matter itself. Yet the word matter has come to be significant of grossness, animalism, and materialism, although it is but the shadow or veil of cosmic spirit, spirit concreted, or manifesting under the multifarious forms of the planes of the universe.
Thank you. Any questions about this? Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, I can read.
Fred? Thank you.
Yeah. So I should be starting with if no physical intellect.
No, always, the grayed out is only a reference. You always just read the dark.
Okay, so that would be ignorant of, say,
No,
even
these changeless and eternal molecules.
Why am I not finding?
You're not reading. You're not reading this text. This is just to show you what page we're on. You're reading this.
These changeless and eternal molecules far thicker in space than the I got everything smaller. In space than the grains on the ocean shore may differ in their constitution along the line of their planes of existence as the soul sustenance differs from its vehicle, the body. Each atom has 7 planes of being or existence, we are taught, and each plane is governed by its specific laws of evolution and absorption.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, so in this last statement, we have a truly occult statement. As previously shown, these 7 planes are qualified by the nominal equivalents of ether, air, fire, water, physical ether, and earth, which phohatically demonstrate as electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, and cohesion, though not necessarily in this order. Like all sentient lives, atoms are made up of 7 progressively subtle sheaths or shariras. Next, the footnote. Could we get a reader, please?
Kira, can you read that for us, please?
Okay, that would be LeBlac.
Always.
The occultists, having most perfect faith in their own exact records, astronomical and mathematical, calculate the age of humanity and assert that the latter, as separate sexes, has existed in this round just 18,618,727 years, as the Brahmanical teachings and even some Hindu calendars declare.
So this is a surprisingly precise figure for humanity's existence as separate sexes. Of course, you have to add 130 plus years since this book was written. The division of which happened during the middle of the Lemurian or third root race. That was the time of the separation of the sexes. DK gives us more info on this stupendous event. Can we get a reader, please?
Eleanor, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. When man individualized in Lemurian days about 18 million years ago, it was the application of the rod of initiation to the logos of our earth chain, which brought about the event and touched into activity certain centers in his body with their corresponding groups. This application, bringing about consciousness on some plane, may be regarded as literally the awakening of the lives concerned to participate in intelligent work on the mental plane. Animal man was conscious on the physical and on the astral planes. By the stimulation effected by the electric rod, this animal man awoke to consciousness on the mental plane. Thus, the three bodies were coordinated and the thinker enabled to function in them.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. It was also 18 million years ago that the hierarchy was established. There was this nexus that happened around that time where you had this separation of the sexes, the individualization, and this setting up of the hierarchy that all came together. And we find out in this previous that it was the application of the rod of initiation to the logos of our earth chain, a chain lord, which is, a stupendous consciousness. This is not just this is far beyond that stage of this Sanat Kumara represents, right? It's this level of a chain lord. So that lord that overshadows all seven globes that pass through the seven rounds of a chain. Right, so all of this came together at this magic time 18 million years ago. So let's read about the establishment of the hierarchy.
It was decided about 17 million years ago, the coming of the hierarchy and the founding of Shambhala being about 18.5 million years ago, to have on the dense physical plane an organization and a headquarters for the mysteries, and to have a band of adepts and chohans who would function in dense physical bodies and thus meet the need of the rapidly awakening humanity. The first outpost for the Shambhala fraternity was the original Temple of the Bees, and it was located in the center of South America, and one of its branches at a much later period was to be found in the ancient Maya institutions. And the basic worship of the sun as the source of life in the hearts of all men. A second branch was later established in Asia, and of this branch, the Himalayan and Southern Indian adepts are the representatives, though the work is materially changed. At a later date than the present, Discoveries will be made revealing the reality of the old form of hierarchical work. Ancient records and monuments will be revealed, some above ground and many in subterranean fastnesses. As the mysteries of Central Asia, in the land stretching from Chaldea and Babylon through Turkestan to Manchuria, including the Gobi Desert, are opened up, it is planned that much of the early history of the Ibizan workers will be revealed.
Won't that be something? Thank you, Bial. Okay, back to the text. So the law of analogy and the plan of structure between the trans-solar system and the intrasolar system planets does not necessarily bear upon the finite condition to which every visible body is subject. In this, our plane of being. In occult science, this law is the first and most important key to cosmic physics. But it has to be studied in its minutest detail, to be turned 7 times before one comes to understand it. Occult philosophy is the only science that can teach it. So first up, this comment about the law of analogy and the plan of structure between trans-solar systems, that's solar systems beyond ours, and intrasolar planets, that's our planets, does not necessarily bear upon the finite conditions into which every visible body is subject in this, our plane of being, about the most complicated way of saying we can't assume that conditions on quote unquote our plane of being are the same as those in other solar systems. And next, in occult science, this law of analogy is the first and most important key to cosmic physics, but it has to be studied in its minutest detail and, quote, to be turned 7 times before one comes to understand it. Occult philosophy is the only science that can teach it. So the key to the law of analogy as it applies to cosmic physics, quote, must be turned 7 times. Each turning of this, or any occult key, takes one into deeper causal awareness of whatever mystery is being revealed. Thus, each turn requires not only more knowledge, but more importantly, a higher level of consciousness in order to comprehend that which is being revealed. Since this represents a vertical ascent, occult philosophy is the only science that provides these keys. No matter what the subject, usually only the first turn of the key is given to the general public. The rest are progressive secrets of initiation. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Martha, can you read that, please? Martha?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
The same will be said of the secret archaic doctrine when proofs are given of its undeniable existence in records. But it will take centuries before much more is given from it. Speaking of the keys to the zodiacal mysteries as being almost lost to the world, it was remarked by the writer in Isis Unveiled some 10 years ago that the said key must be turned 7 times before the whole system is divulged. We will give it but 1 turn, and thereby allow the profane 1 glimpse into the mystery. Happy he who understands the whole.
Thank you, Martha. And this concludes HPB's commentary on verse 4. So, as is our habit, let's take a look at the verse itself. First up, he builds them in the likeness of older worlds. He is Fohat. The wheels are the numinal source of the planets, not the physical planets themselves. The opening lines of stanza 3 from the Stanzas of Dzyan and a treatise on cosmic fire describes their genesis. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes. Kirsten, Can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Stanza 3. The great wheel turned upon itself. The 7 lesser wheels rushed into being. They revolved like their mother, around, within, and forward. All that existed was. The wheels were diverse and in unification one. As evolved the great wheel, the inner fire bursts forth. It touched into life wheel the first. It circulated. A million fires rose up. The quality of matter densified, but form was not.
Thank you. Interesting line. Quality of matter densified, but form was not, suggesting that this matter of the highest subplanes pre-exists what DK calls actual form, which is a vehicle for spirit. So the form aspect was still developing at this point. And these wheels pre-exist this stage of densification, right? They're like blueprints. HPB comments on the phrase, the lightness of older wheels, at the beginning of her commentary on the verse we just finished, verse 4. Quote, the wheels are built in the likeness of older wheels, that is, those that existed in preceding Manvantaras and went into Pralaya, because the law for the birth, growth, and decay of everything in cosmos, from the sun to the glowworm and the grass, is one. So both the substance and the pattern by which the planets that manifested in previous Manvantaras is reborn through the wheels of the new Manvantara, though now conditioned by the energies and qualities of the second rather than the first solar system. Next, placing them on the imperishable centers. These are the Laya centers that we talked about in the last webinar. HPB says, the worlds are built neither upon nor over nor in the Laya centers, the 0 point being a condition, not any mathematical point. So the Laya centers are not a locale, or as she says, mathematical point, because it is through them that 3D space comes into being. They pre-exist three-dimensional space. The old commentary describes their genesis in this way. The great breath digs through space 7 holes into Leia to cause them to circumgyrate during Manvantara. HPB says when Fohat is said to produce 7 Leia centers or Laya centers, it means that for formative or creative purposes, the great law, theists may call it God, stops, or rather modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points within the area of the manifested universe. During Pralaya, Laya becomes, quote, the nirvanic dissociation of all substances, merged after a life cycle into the latency of their primary conditions. It is the luminous but bodiless shadow of the matter that was, the realm of negativeness, wherein lie latent during their period of rest the active forces of the universe. Leia centers are also the luminous but bodiless shadow of the matter that will be, so that was and will be during the earliest stages of a Manvantara. Next, how does Fohat build him? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto. The fiery dust is made up of atomic lives in their primordial state, each with the potential for eventual self-consciousness. Balls of fire suggest planetary bodies, but any aggregate of lesser lives could be called such. running through and round them suggests that Fohat magnetically binds substance by means of its directing thought, quote unquote, infusing life thereinto, or binding spirit with matter, is the unique task and ability of Fohat. Any thoughts about this? You can ask thoughts, and you can ask questions anytime you want. Next, then sets them into motion, some one way, some the other. This is the first stage of directional differentiation. Until this point, the only motion was that of the great breath. With this further influence, Fohat initiates the myriads of life cycles that make up the eventual diversity of the universe. Again, this quote brings further insight. When Fohat is said to produce 7 Leia centers, it means that for the formative or creative process, the great law stops, or rather modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points. So it is this directional modification that is referenced by the phrase, Fohat sets them into motion, some one, some the other way. Next, they are cold. He makes them hot. Heat is a function of a further stage in manifestation. It reaches its fruition through fire by friction. Stanza 3 of A Treatise on Cosmic Fire gets us greater detail on this stage. Could we get a reader, please?
Hi, Karen. Can you read that for us, please?
Faster revolved the greater wheel. Blue-white emerged the flame. The sons of God again came down, and a lesser wheel revolved. 7 times the revolution, and 7 times great the heat. More solid grew the formless mass, and deeper sank the stone. To the heart of inmost fire, the sacred stone went down.
Okay, so the sacred or philosopher's stone is a metaphor for the spirit aspect, entombed, as it were, in matter. And you can see here that with each revolution, which is initiated by Fohat, the heat grows stronger, right? And as the mass, the formless mass grows more solid. Okay, next, they are cold. He makes them hot. Oh no, I said that one, didn't I? Next, they are dry. He makes them moist. The coming in of moisture represents a certain stage of manifestation, as we see in this passage from late in this volume of the Secret Doctrine. Could we get a reader, please?
Yvonne, can you read that, please?
Occult science teaches that Mother lies stretched in infinity during Pralaya as the great deep, the dry waters of space, according to the quaint expression in the Catechism, and becomes wet only after the separation and the moving over its face of Narayana, the spirit which is invisible flame, which never burns, but sets on fire all that it touches and gives it life and generation.
Thank you. Dry waters of space. So it's a initial stage of matter. This concept, water always refers to material substance, and becomes only wet after the separation and the moving over its face of this spirit called Narayana. Okay. Next, they shine. He fans and cools them. He, again, of course, is always Fohat. In the Würzburg manuscript, an early version of the Secret Doctrine, the words he fans and cools them are followed by, quote, putting out their luster. Fanning is also a ritual action performed by Hindu priests, with fans inscribed with certain magical symbols and accompanied by an invocation. Finally, thus acts Fohat, from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities. And eternity is here used as a systemic Mahamanvantara, of which there are 7, consisting of 3 major and 4 minor solar logoic incarnations. The entire process here outlined in verse 4 is also given in an old commentary from later in the Secret Doctrine. Could we get a reader, please?
Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
From the one life, formless and uncreate, proceeds the universe of lives. First was manifested from the deep, cold, luminous fire, which formed the curds in space. These fought, and a great heat was developed by the encountering and collision, which produced rotation. Then came the first manifested material, fire, the hot flames, the wanderers in heaven. Heat generates moist vapor. That forms solid water, then dry mist, then liquid mist, watery, that puts out the luminous brightness of the pilgrims, comets, and forms solid watery wheels. Bhumi, the earth, appears with 6 sisters. These produce by their continuous motion the interior fire, heat, and an aqueous mist, which yields the 3rd world element, water. And from the breath of all, air is born. These 4 are the 4 lives of the first 4 periods, rounds of Manvantara. The 3 last will follow.
Okay, so we have a lot encompassed in this verse 4 and what happens during this time. Right? Any thoughts, questions about this? Okay, let's take a look at MPH's commentary on verse 4. Could we get a reader for this column on the right, please?
Ann Parker, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Fohat, the voice of the progeny, built these wheels in the likeness of the great wheel, and according to the plan that had been established eons before. The imperishable center he used as the axis or thread, and upon these centers he strung the wheels or beads. They were capable of being destroyed, but the thread was imperishable. Fohat gathered the flaming sparks of space. He made balls of fire, nebulae. He ran through them, impregnating them with his energy. He gave them his power, which is motion. They turned in different directions according to the work they had to accomplish. They were cold and dark, the mental air mist. He made them hot, the astral fire mist. He made them moist, human water ether. He cooled them into solids, chemical dense substances. Thus acts the spirit of Fohat, the Lord of change, from the dawn of creation till the twilight, his labors taking 7 eternities.
Okay, so that's Manly P. Hall's interpretation of verse 4. I like this one. I think it's a good, solid interpretation, and it gives us just a little shift in our perspective. So progeny usually means descendants, but in this context refers to that which makes possible descent into the form world, and thus all future progeny. MPH uniquely associates cold and dark with mental air mist, heat with astral fire mist, etc. It's logical, but not the only possible interpretation. You could also say cold and dark could be seen as the Buddhic, heat or fire mist as the monastic, since that's the plane of fire. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Andrea, can you read that for us, please?
Yep. With these verses, the 4th sloka of stanza 6 ends that portion of the stanzas which relates to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahapralaya, or universal destruction, which, when it comes, sweeps out of space every differentiated thing. Gods as atoms, like so many dry leaves. From this verse onwards, the stanzas are concerned only with our solar system in general, with the planetary chains therein, inferentially, and with the history of our globe, the fourth and its chain, especially. All the stanzas and verses which follow in this book, one refer only to the evolution of and on our earth. With regard to the latter, a strange tenet, strange from the modern scientific standpoint only, of course, is held which ought to be made known.
Okay, thank you. So first, with these verses, the fourth sloka of stanza 6 ends that portion of the stanzas which relates to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahapralaya, or universal destruction, which, when it comes, sweeps out of space every differentiated thing, gods as atoms, like so many dry leaves. Actually, verse 4, as well as other verses in stanza 6, can be applied to both universal and our systemic cosmogony. When we started this years ago, I was sure that all these stanzas referenced the universal, not our solar system. But there were indications all along the way that, in fact, they applied systemically. But here she's telling us definitely from here on, it will apply systemically, that is to this solar system only. A question that has often been discussed concerning universal pralaya is, when units of consciousness once again emerge from union, what's called in theosophy the day be with us, or immersion in the absolute, do they retain the consciousness that they developed in the previous Manvantara? Or does everything start from scratch? In a systemic pralaya, consciousness is frozen in time, in situ, she says, to be built on once again in the new cycle. But there's a school of thought that suggests that this is impossible during a cosmic pralaya, a hard reset, if you will, because no differentiation, including cosmic akashic records, could survive the sweep back into absolute oneness. Okay, next up. A declaration that all the succeeding stanzas will confine themselves to the evolution of our solar system with special emphasis on the Earth. And then next, could we get a reader for this, please?
Tia, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. And I have a question afterward.
Sure.
Okay. But before entirely new and rather startling theories are presented to the reader, they must be prefaced by a few words of explanation. This is absolutely necessary, as these theories clash not only with modern science, but contradict on certain points. Earlier statements made by other theosophists who claim to base their explanations and renderings of these teachings on the same authority as we do.
Thank you. And that's these same authorities are Esoteric Buddhism and Man. That's by A.P. Synod. But let's just continue.
Did you have a question, Tia?
Yeah, go ahead, Tia.
Oh, no. It's probably better to finish this thought. I'll ask afterward.
Okay, great.
Did you want me to continue reading or?
Sure, why not?
This may give rise to the idea that there is a decided contradiction between the expounders of the same doctrine, whereas the difference in reality arises from the incompleteness of the information given to earlier writers, who thus drew some erroneous conclusions and indulged in premature speculations in their endeavor to present a complete system to the public. Thus, the reader who is already a student of theosophy must not be surprised to find in these pages the rectification of certain statements made in various theosophical works, and is also the explanation of certain points which have remained obscure because they were necessarily left incomplete. Many are the questions upon which even the author of Esoteric Buddhism, the best and most accurate of all such works, has not touched. On the other hand, even he has introduced several mistaken notions which must now be presented in their true mystic light as far as the present writer is capable of doing so.
Okay, so let me comment on this and then we'll get to your question.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, the best theosophical treatise before the Secret Doctrine, according to HPB, was A.P. Sennett's Esoteric Buddhism. We saw it referenced in this footnote, right here. You may remember from old diary leaves that Colonel Olcott and HPB often stayed with Sennett at his home in India when they were traveling. In fact, there's a book entitled The Letters of H.P. Blavatsky to A.P. Sennett that chronicles their correspondence. Really incredible, deeply interesting stuff. The quote, rectification of certain statements, as well as the introduction of entirely new material to the public was made possible by the overshadowing of HPB by a number of masters as she wrote the Secret Doctrine, including the Master DK. Okay, so Tia?
My question was concerning the cosmic versus the systemic pralaya.
Yeah.
We're talking about that destruction. We're talking about of the 7 solar systems in a cosmic pralaya. Is that what we're talking about? Being so massive?
Well, there are probably an infinite number of more inclusive pralayas as you go up. For instance, the one you just mentioned probably has its own pralaya, those 7 solar systems. It's probably a unit that has pralaic cyclic periods. But a universal pralaya is the whole ball of wax. It's the entire manifested universe, right? And during that time, there's basically a question about just what happens, because in systemic pralayas, where all consciousness development is frozen in situ. And then when you reemerge and take on new forms conditioned by new energies, you continue at the point that you left off before, right? But there's a question as to whether in a universal pralaya, which would be the complete pulling back into spirit, all diversity, all individualized consciousness back into the oneness of the absolute, that when that happens, that also along with that is pulled all these universal Akashic records, because that's part of the diversity that returns to the absolute. And so there's a school of thought that that everything is dissolved at that point, and that at the new universal 100 years of Brahma, that everything starts anew. And then there's another school of thought which says that there is, just like in a systemic pralaya, that consciousness is taken up again where it left off. The latter seems like the only fair solution, but who knows if the universe is, quote, fair in that way. So that's the question I was bringing up. Yeah, Robert, I see your hand up. Sorry, Bill.
In the introductory postulates in Cosmic Fire, from the cosmic logoi, it's described as there, succeed in whatever the exact wording is, in successive gradations, et cetera, the numberless universes. So I think there's a little bit of confusion between the word universal and numberless universes. What makes it, I don't, and again, this is all speculation, I don't know if anything really returns to the absolute, or it just returns to some something that compared to manifestation appears like an absolute non-manifestation.
Well, it's interesting. The numberless universes are going to be the whole universe in a series, a string of manifestations. It's the whole ball of wax. It's not. He's not forwarding the concept of a multiverse. Like
no, it's talking about the numberless universes, which forgetting about multiverse all happening at the same time, yada yada yada. But each universe can only be dealt with. So this is the Secret Doctrine is dealing with a universe upon which it's possible to write and speculate, but the rest of it can't be speculated upon. And that's why I say nothing really returns to the absolute.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that because
it doesn't come from the absolute in the first place. Okay.
Well, it's mirrored into manifestation from the absolute.
Well, it says in that same section of Cosmic Fire, the manifested universe is contained within that absolute universe. It doesn't say it's reflected, radiated, or any of those or created. It's a mystery of how manifestation, where it comes from. And again, I'm not talking about things that I don't have personal knowledge about, but I think that the things do not come from the absolute, nor do they return to the absolute in the wisdom tradition in which DK is writing.
Well, I don't know what to do with that. My understanding is that the day be with us, which happens at either a systemic or a universal pralaya, is an unfettered participation in the spirit aspect, which is one with the absolute. But since no speculation is possible, I guess we can stop there.
Right.
Okay.
I'll find out if they'll be with us, I think.
Tom has his hand up.
Okay, Tom.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, we cannot stop speculating. This is so delicious speculating point. So I would add to Robert's idea that perhaps we are too absolute when we think about the absolute, because yes, it is a mystery, but to think in two terms, that there is something, they be with us, where everything is collapsed and then suddenly everything comes again, that would mean some kind of dice playing if there's no continuity, and that would be perhaps too simplified picture. Perhaps samsara is nirvana all the time, and the absolute is breathing all the time, and there is both things happening. There is continuity, and there is this kind of absorption, and it just happens all the time, but we don't understand it. But it is a delicious way to speculate things, not in so absolute terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, we move out of our time reference pretty quickly when you evolve. You leave behind this time reference. The ancients had it, then you pass through the 7 gates that were represented by the planets, which were various levels of restriction, and you emerged out of the gates of Saturn into the timeless realm, right? So what do you do with that? In this case, time is and it isn't. You become one with spirit in either case, either through emancipation from form or through the end of the cycle, right? And so, so what happens to, those who then emancipate themselves before the end of the pralaya, turn back to help others emancipate themselves. And it actually is through this mass emancipation, in other words, the purpose of each scheme in the solar system, of each sun in the 7 solar systems, and then ever more expansively. It fulfills that very purpose, to emancipate the imprisoned spirit from the form aspect. So then, what then? Then there seems to be a further stage of what's called the day be with us, which is this absolute unity with well, with spirit. But you see, language falls short because you don't have unity with something. It's just, the term identification is maybe the closest we can get.
Yes.
But
Francis,
yeah, we're there.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're going to have
please.
to pull the plug. We have some time restrictions today, so hate to do it in the middle of a conversation, but we're at 2:45. We'll just have a quick announcement of the next meetings and then say goodbye.
Just when we were so close.
Yeah, right. That discussion was never going to end. I'm sorry. Okay, the next Secret Doctrine, the next one in this series, is on December 18th, and it will be at 8 p.m. GMT. Okay, but before that, we have the Secret Teachings of All Ages, which is going to be on 4 December at 8 p.m. And then we have the, what is it you've got? Right, Treatise on Cosmic Fire, which is 25 November at 6 p.m. So Francis keeps pretty busy with his 3 webinars 4 times a month.
And one thing, in early December, we're going to have back-to-back Fridays for TCF. I think it's the 9th and the 16th. Instead of the 2nd and 4th Fridays, it's going to be the 2nd and 3rd Fridays. So we'll have one after the other on the 9th and 16th. And that's just to avoid the holidays, all the busyness that happens at that point. Okay, thank you all. And yeah, it was great to be with you. It's, it's so much fun to host this series. So hope you got something from it. Thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.